Well, this is my first set of notes for the year. You guys will probably be hearing me. Well, you would have anyway, but you'll be hearing me a lot, seeing me not that much. But the goal is to get these notes out to you ahead of time. I do expect you guys to take notes in some way, just so it helps get all the stuff in your brain. First thing we're going to do is the coordinate plane and the definitions that you're going to need to know for geometry. This first part should be review for every single one of you. You guys know what the coordinate plane is. It's basically a way for you to graph points. And if you remember from before, the horizontal is the x-axis, the y-axis is the vertical. Sometimes you might be asked what quadrant things are in. First quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, fourth quadrant. All Roman numerals. Yeah, so that should be easy. You should know that already. You've probably been doing this for, geez, a long time. Um, this is sometimes also called, just in case you ever wanted to know, the Cartesian plane. And that's because the dude who kind of standardized it, his name was Rene Descartes. If you've ever heard of the saying, I think, therefore I am, it's a philosophical thing. He did that. Before him, these weren't perpendicular. They were nice up and down, left and right. People made their own graphs, and they could be at any angle, and everything was way, 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 way more confusing. So, to graph a point, which is also called an ordered pair. You do the x-coordinate first, then the y-coordinate. Sometimes it's you walk, then you climb the ladder. Easy enough. So basically, if I asked you to graph the point do 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 boom 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 -4, 3. So I guess the other thing I should mention in case you forgot, negative positive, just like a normal number line, negative positive, just vertical. So if I ask you to graph the point -4, 3, you are to walk -4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then positive 3. 1, 2, 3. And you would put -4, 3. Easy enough. That should be review. Hopefully y'all remember that. The only thing that some people get mixed up on sometimes is when you have zeros. So this would mean go over 0, which means you go nowhere, and then you go up 2. It also gets a little confusing once we start talking about slope, because everybody remembers slope is rise over run, which is vertical, horizontal, but pairs are horizontal, vertical. Cool, cool, cool. Alright, so now, let's talk about geometry. In geometry, all basic shapes are made of 3 things. Are made of 3 things. It's the 3 basic parts. Points, which is a dot, or an ordered pair, as we said before, which is why we started with that. It has 0 dimensions, meaning there's no left, right, up, or down. It's just there. And the way you get a point, it's where 2 lines cross. which brings us to our next thing, which is a line. It is infinite in both directions. It is one-dimensional. Now, a lot of people would ask, if you cared, why is it one-dimensional when there's a left and a right? When you're talking about dimensions, you're just talking basically horizontal, vertical. You know, you're not talking about left to right. It's the same thing because you're going along the same path. This is where two planes cross. And lastly, planes. And it's basically a piece of paper. It's two-dimensional, which means it has length and width. And usually you draw it like a parallelogram. So it has length and it has width. So literally a piece of paper. Alright. That's the basics of what everything in geometry is made of. Now let's go into the vocabulary that you're going to have to know. So hopefully you read the syllabus. The whole first section, the whole first quiz is all on these different vocabulary words that you're going to have to know. First one, collinear. Obviously, the most important part of this is the word line, and maybe that's not obvious. Maybe you thought it was ear, and if so, well, you're probably a little strange. I don't know. Collinear, co means basically together, like cooperate, you're working together. Cohabitate, you're living together. So together line, which basically means points together in a line. Lines have to be straight. So basically collinear means you got some dots, you can draw a line through them. Coplanar is basically the same thing. It's together plane, so it's points together on a plane. So like I said up here, think of it as a piece of paper. So it's points together on a piece of paper, which these three dots are on literally this piece of paper, so those would be coplanar. Usually how you draw it is you draw your piece of paper, you draw a dot, you draw a dot, you draw a dot. They don't have to be in the same line, they just got to be on that same plane. Congruent. The same size. Sometimes you say equal. So the reason there's different words between equal and congruent literally means same size. It's not talking about numbers. You wouldn't say 7 is congruent to 7. You'd say like this triangle is congruent to this triangle. And how you usually see congruency marked is with tick marks. So if I have a line, segment, and a line segment here, if I wanted to say that these two are congruent, you just put a tick mark like that. And then if I wanted to say, hey look, we have another line there, another line here, you'd put two tick marks. So these two are congruent to each other, these two are congruent to each other. So they have to match. So basically, those are the same. And then this one and this one are the same. So tick marks. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later too once we get into angles and stuff like that. Hopefully you know the word parallel. We'll get more into this later. There's a whole chapter just on parallel lines and stuff. You know, they go in the same direction. And they never cross. So, got two lines that are parallel. And the reason we're doing this is basically to show these two lines are parallel in geometry, you've got to put these little arrow marks in the middle. Those arrow marks mean parallel. In the middle mean parallel. Oh my gosh, I am talking way too slowly. Another thing you have to know is if I wanted these two lines to be parallel, if we called this line J and this one K, this is the symbol for parallel. Right there, just two parallel lines, parallel. Can't believe it's been 11 minutes and 26 seconds already. What the heck? Okay, so similar to parallel, hopefully you know the word perpendicular. They cross at 90 degrees. So if you're drawing two perpendicular lines, and this is actually getting a little bit ahead of ourselves just because we haven't even talked about 90 degrees yet and stuff like that, you've got to put this mark. Okay, that mark means 90 degrees. 90 degrees. All right, now 3 more, and then I am done. And these seem simple, but the reason these are 3 vocabulary words is you've really got to know how to label them properly. So, a line, infinite in both directions. So, a line has to have 2 arrows. And if we call that A and we call this Z, you would call this line AZ, and you have to have both of those arrows. If you don't put both those arrows above that AZ, then you have not labeled your line properly, and I will mark you wrong, and so would any math teacher. Ray. Infinite in one direction. Did you guys know that Frank's favorite band is One Direction? He is a big Harry Styles fan. So, a ray starts at a point, goes infinitely one way. BX. So, to label a ray, you know, BX, so you know, and then this goes infinitely to the right through the X, so you have to do it this way. If you would have drawn that one arrow the opposite way, you'd be wrong. It has to follow and match how this goes. You could have written XB, I guess, and put the arrow the other way, but that's just confusing. Try to keep things in the same direction. The way people try to remember ray usually is if you have a sun, there's, you know, rays of light. And if this was a painting, it'd be kind of like Bob Ross talked about, happy little rays of light, if you guys know who Bob Ross is. And then there'd be happy little clouds and maybe some dark trees down here, you know. I am not an artist. Trees. I don't know, maybe a little river. Maybe I should be an artist. I don't know. Yeah. Lastly, this is the one that you'll actually see the most out of all of this class, and it's a line segment. It has endpoints on both sides. So it's basically part of a line, because that's what the line word segment means, of a line. And so you'll see mostly line segments just because BC, right? And then it doesn't go infinitely in either direction. It stops at C, stops at B, so you would call this BC with no arrows or anything like that. So it's actually really important that you label line segments with no arrows, rays with one arrow going in the right direction, lines with two arrows, because mathematicians are very particular about that sort of thing. So yeah, that's it.